good start. Yeah, we're good. Okay. 4 things for you today in this speech. First, a bit of setup, then some reasons why we actually fix some of the systematic exclusion we see in modern day art, some of the impacts of that, and finally why we actually get better art under our side of the house. So firstly, a bit of setup. What do we think this looks like? Well, we think this is actually a fairly simple process. Basically, we can just see who's voting for what, who they are, we can see the committees, we can see what they voted for after the fact so that it gets released publicly, we can see the reasons for the nominations to these committees, i.e. why people are chosen to be on committees, and we can see what the criteria are for selecting what wins what award. We think this does a few things. First of all, it creates a regularly seen and publicly available list of what goes on for these awards. We think that's really important and a fairly basic setup for this debate. This also creates a record that committees who are biased can be regularly seen by the public and can be regularly seen by people who want to see this. We think that's important and that's always going to happen under the affirmative side of the house. We also think that this is going to apply to all significant art awards and is largely just going to be in broadly the area of art, i.e. your films, your music, TV, things like that. First reason why the affirmative team wins this debate is because we are the best team to tackle the systematic exclusion currently present in the film industry as a whole. Now, we hope that this isn't contentious, but we do think there is currently serious systematic exclusion within the film industry, i.e. POC are badly treated, WGM are badly treated, virtually every minority in the film industry is badly treated compared to the amount of white men. There's a couple of big reasons for this, because I think, firstly, you just do a simple intuition pump on this. 2021 was the first time a woman of color won Best Director at the Oscars. Is it theoretically possible that no woman of color released a good movie prior to 2021? We really don't think so. 2023 is the first Asian supporting actor ever. Were there no good Asian supporting actors for 2023? Again, we just don't think that's true. We think that's any average reasonable person sees that that's just not true. We think the reason why we continually get this bias that's slowing down the progress of our POC, WG actors is because these institutions were set up by white men just ages ago. Fundamentally, when we're talking about prestigious art awards, most of what brings prestige is just the age of the art awards. I.e. this is old, it's had time to establish itself. The reason why it has prestige is because it's old, it's had time to establish itself. It has historical relevance in terms of going back in the form of the art. We think that this means that these prestigious awards, the ones we're talking about, are very likely going to have been set up by white men, predominantly to give awards to white men. This means you have this systematic bias against all sort of non-white cishet men from the very beginning of these institutions existing. Secondly, we think that these factors are cyclical. That is to say that when the favored white men get these awards and give out awards, that helps them get further in the industry. Getting an Oscar just helps you get started in more movies, helps you get on Oscar committees. That means that because these white men are giving awards to white men then get on committees to give more awards to white men. We think we are the only side here that breaks this cycle. So why do we actually fix this problem of systematic inclusion? First of all, we make it obvious who has made a decision. Under the current status quo system, you're basically arguing against an ethereal body where any time you say hey, the Oscars have only nominated white directors and male directors this year, you can immediately just be have no idea who to blame because the committee can all put their hands up and say it wasn't me, you can't find out who did this. I am such a diverse person who cares so much about this. We think that by doing this, we actually give people the opportunity to hunt out and see the biases present in these people. They can look and see this person has only ever voted for these cishet white men. We can see their bias. They can't hide behind the veil of secrecy that is present under side negative. Additionally, we think under the status quo, you have no real personal incentive to judge correctly. That is because while you have the incentive of the award show being popular, personally you aren't going to get any backlash from people who are trying to hunt out these people who are causing systematic bias in the entertainment industry. The reason why you don't get this is because there's no actual punishment towards you because you can't be found out. There's no way for people to find out who is biased in this and who is actually being diverse. That means that everyone is hiding this group of people who are the people who are perpetuating discrimination in the entertainment industry. Additionally, by reviewing the criteria of these award shows, that is to say, what people are voting for and why they're voting for it, what they're told to vote about, you can actually judge against that compared to what they voted for. Let's just say, we're not saying that they're all, we're talking about figuring out if they make the right subjective decision. We're saying you can compare what they voted for against the criteria and see did what they voted for match against the criteria. If it didn't and they were voting for cishet white men who just did not meet the criteria of being a good director compared to a POC or a WGM, we think that clearly shows bias. We think you can find bias this way without sacrificing the subjective nature of award shows. So why do we get this impact of helping POC, WGM, majorly excluded groups? Firstly, we give these people a really strong incentive to check their biases. That is to say that if they are found to have these significantly biased opinions and are found to consistently be voting for these pieces of art that are directed by cis-het white men, what's eventually going to happen is they're going to be found out, people are going to find out what they've done, they are going to be like publicly shamed, and they are going to lose their position, lose their integrity, lose their reputation, which is the number one thing they care about as people in the entertainment industry. Major rewards have a really significant career effect, because like winning an Oscar obviously massively boosts your career. Winning a Grammy massively boosts your career. A few reasons for this. First of all, you just get more publicity, lots of publicity. Second of all, people in the entertainment industry really watch these shows, they care about who wins. I think that's fairly obvious. So we get this situation where we actually have the incentive to shape bias. Second reason we actually help POC/WGM is because this breaks the cyclical problem. We force them to have meaningful engagement. I am tired of any sort of push we get from negative, saying that we can fix the current system just by like having more people like more diversity there. We need to force this. We need to force them to engage with WGM. We need to force them to engage with POC, or else we are going to show people that they are being biased. We need to force them to have their records be public. Otherwise, you just get, again, this veil of secrecy they're able to hide behind. We think this is a direct benefit on side affirmative. Finally, we'd just like to finally establish that, like, yes, giving these awards is important to the prestige and things like that. The second major push we have today is on the discursive function of art. That is to say, art in society is primarily designed to do like one or more of three things. That is, it's designed to entertain, it's designed to reflect society, or it is designed to send a message. What we say is that under our side of the house, we get a far better use and far better commendation of art than they do under the negative side of the house. Why do we get this? Because we have established criteria. When we have this criteria of what they're judging on becoming clear, it becomes easy to see the extent to which it is being critically judged compared to the public reception. What we mean by this is we want to actually, on the affirmative side of the house, celebrate art that gives narratives that speak to the common man, not your average wanky film critic with a multi-year film degree. Because we think that the large messaging, the films that actually largely affect society, are the ones that are more important than the ones we want to celebrate. Why? Because films with better messages in terms of these marginalized groups are more likely the ones that are going to resonate with these marginalized groups. And we also think this is just generally going to improve the quality of art, because it means that art doesn't get awards simply by being Oscar baity anymore, or simply by doing the things the Grammys want. It's by doing the things that people want to hear, saying the messages people need to hear, and actually having common appeal. These awards are a reflection of how we want art to be received under the affirmative side. Under the negative side, what they get is art simply of award shows simply being how well can you appeal to these 300 people who are all majorly involved in the film industry, majorly embedded in it. What we say is we get something closer to an actual system where public engagement and public recognition of your film as a strong work of art is required to be recognized as a good work of art. We don't want to celebrate, we want to celebrate important narratives, not just these films that have no functional meaning other than to be Oscar bait. We get this because the incentive to appeal to art, which is speaking to the common man, becomes much stronger on our side of the house. We obviously just get that because when you don't appeal to these films that are commonly speaking to people, actually have narratives which have a large range of extension, you just get seen to be just voting for these art house things. You get called a wanker. Very clear incentive not to do that in the movies industry. That's why we are proud to engage.
Today I'd like to discuss three things. First about the model, second about this idea of who achieves better support, and the final is about who gets better art on which side of the house. First thing I'm going to discuss today is about the model. And the opposition comes up with this counter model that is about proving explicit diverse categories. And the main issue we see with this is about the narrative. This narrative that we know already exists, where we undermine the achievements of minorities, we undermine the achievements of women, of people of gender minorities, of people of colour. This already exists, and what we're going to have under their side of the house is a worsening of this narrative. The idea that you couldn't win a real Oscar, you had to get your own special category to win this. We know this happens. We've had precedent for this in a variety of different things, where you have autonomous awards, and there is a huge amount of backlash and this sort of derision of winning that event, that it's not as good as it could have been. And that is their suggestion on their side of the house, that it would be equivalent to winning a special effects, which no one really cares about. And this is a comparison their first speaker actually made, that even if it's a lesser Oscar, it doesn't matter. Yes, it matters. Just because I am a woman, I should not be derived and have an award that I should be very eligible to win the real one. I should be capable, no doubt my film or my performance is just as competitive in that section. I shouldn't have to be moved to the side and given one that is considered derisive to be able to be given an Oscar, when we can actually change the change the system, we can make people accountable, and we can change the narrative around the entirety of the Oscars with having accountability and having transparency around who is winning and why they are winning to create diversity in the awards. And so the next thing I want to talk about is mainly about this idea of who achieves the better, support and who achieves the best change. And the opposition suggests that it's unlikely that we would be able to achieve any change under our House 4. They split it up into a couple of different mechs, but it's essentially one, which is lack of pressure, nepotism, public pressure doesn't really exist. Yes, we can see public pressure already exists. There is precedence for this, but there is precedence for people to get change. Currently, the people who are irritated at the Oscars, at the Grammys, at Les Césars, who are pissed off about what has happened and about people they perceive as being passed over for awards they should have won, are essentially railing against God. We have no idea who's making these decisions. We have no idea how they're making these decisions. And as a result, there is no one we can point at and question and ask. There is no accountability to the decision making behind this. These people can sit in closed rooms where we do not know who they are, and they can make their choice. They can make that choice with as much bias as they want. They can make that choice with as little thought as to, diversity and to other elements other than their own interests. And they do not even have to make the correct choice, and we have nothing to say about it. We have no way to hold them accountable. We have no way to judge their capacity to make that decision. That is what is happening under the status quo, and that is what the opposition is defending. On the other side, on our side of the House, what we are asking for is accountability. When we can see what is happening, who is in the room, why they have been chosen, who they have voted for, the metric against which all of the films have been compared, we can point out and say, hey, this person's only voted for cis white males in the past 10 years. That's probably a problem. Or this person, consistently, despite the rest of the panel viewing this diverse film as incredibly important, has voted against it. This is something we can see. And the actual, initial instilling this right at the start may not instantly make the Oscars diverse, but what it does allow is for accountability heading into the future, where we know what has happened, we know what our people are voting for, and we know why those decisions have been made. So we can actually track back and say, hey, yeah, this person should have won that Oscar, or actually that decision was quite questionable, and these are the reasons why. We can see that, we know that, and we can hold them accountable. That is not something they can stand for on their side of the House. Additionally, when we talk about achieving, good results for diverse groups, under their model, where they've got explicit diverse categories, what they're actually going to do is exclude and kill autonomous competitions and autonomous awards that already exist, like queer film competitions. Look, these things exist, they're really important, and we should nurture them. And by sort of instilling a half-hearted attempt at having this in the Oscars that's going to be put to the side, that's going to be pushed off, what they're actually going to do is they're also going to kill what is already existing in these queer spaces and in these feminist spaces for films like this, which are equally important and need to be cared for as well. Additionally, they talked about this idea of, it's easier to make change and you get guaranteed change on their side of the House. And yes, while you may have someone guaranteed to win an award, if that award is not held to be as prestigious, is not held to have as much effect, if that award, is perceived to have not necessarily been deserved, and if that award is still, awarded under murky circumstances where no one really knows how they got it or why they got it, that is not the change we want going into the future. That is not change that we can point to, we can hold accountable, and we can talk about consistently. And they also talked about this idea of getting a false sense of, people, we're just doing this so that we can, make people feel good about themselves. No, this is going to create change. When we have that accountability, there is a push for this to change. Society wants this to change. We know that happens. The opposition has admitted that. By giving them these methods of accountability, we can create that change going into the future. We know that can happen because we know that people will ask. People are questioning already, but right now they do not have anyone to question or any metric to question by. That is what we are providing them on our side of the House. And we will maintain outrage over this because this is something we should be outraged about, but we are given the capacity to be outraged and the capacity to directly pinpoint what we are outraged at and why we are outraged, as opposed to, as I said, essentially railing against God. And additionally, they brought up this idea of, white films not winning because, it might just be all diverse, and that's not, and white films will still win. I highly doubt we're going to get to the point where, they're not given any credit at all, but we'll actually be able to track whether they deserve that award in the decision-making processes. The next and my final point I want to talk about today is this idea of art getting worse. And this competition talks about, having this explicit criteria, you'd have to pass the Bechdel test and what a draw that is on a film, and having these standards you have to make about how many explosions you might need to win a special effects award. We're not saying that we're going to, you need 10 explosions to be guaranteed this award. We're saying that there is a standard that is explicit. It doesn't have to be, two women have to talk to each other and you have to have a person of colour. No, but there will be a set of standards around, are we judging this is the weighting of the film choices, and this is the weighting of the character development, and this is the weighting of the narrative line, and this is the weighting of how much emotional impact it has. So showing those things and getting explicit about what is important in a film is what we're discussing, not about how many explosions we're having. And additionally, when we go back to the second point that we talked about this discursive function of art, what this means is we're actually getting an explicit acknowledgement from the Oscars, from the César, from the Grammys about what they think is valuable. And society as a whole can actually can actually read that and see if that compares up to what society values. So what we're going to get on our side of the house is we're going to get, sort of meeting this problem gap and getting, having our Oscars reflect more the personal choice of our society, the emotional impact, the films that we as a society value, not just the ones that on paper look good or on paper, make a lot of sense to someone with a university education about exactly how films can be constructed. And additionally, they bring up this idea of being formulaic films not being meaningful. And again, this is highly unlikely. We're not going to have those explicit 10 explosions per film, but we're going to have a much more generalized and a program much more reflective of actual society's discourse and appearance and thoughts about film. And that is incredibly important on this debate. So we win on all three of these points, and all three fall to our side of the house, and this is why we're proud to propose.
The first question I want to ask is what impact actually having these diverse categories does have on the representation of these films. Side affirmative tells us two things. They tell you firstly that these are likely to be seen as kind of poorly or seen as not really real awards. But that's secondly that it is likely to kill autonomous competitions or the specific appetite for awards shows which reward specifically diverse communities. I want to know one thing immediately. If you believe that different awards are that cater towards specific groups are often seen as fake or seen as unimportant, I want to note the situation in which they are seen as most unimportant is when they have to operate as external competitions entirely, right? Because the reason they are seen as unimportant is not because they cater to a specific audience, because by having them be entirely external competitions, you limit the audience that cares about them at all. Because they want to tell you that now no other people, none of the people don't watch the external shows. I think there is a set of people who is always watching both. It is the the communities that care about those things. Obviously, if you're a queer film fan, you go to both things. Uniquely, when you incorporate diverse categories into competitions that are already mainstream, is when you uniquely access the audience that is most useful towards you. It means, firstly, you access an entire set of people who otherwise would not have watched these films, because you probably do still watch the Oscars. If you care about the Oscars, you're probably still willing to watch every category. It just makes it significantly more likely you are now exposed to a greater diversity of things. That means more people watch them. They're likely to achieve a commercial success. Secondly, you just get more critical acclaim. These things are important shows. I would say these awards still matter. An Oscar still matter. An Oscar is an Oscar. They are like an Emmy is an Emmy. They are recognized within their respective fields. They still have acclaim. Particularly, they have acclaim within those specific groups. And now you get more acclaim within the industry. Why is that important? Firstly, it means you're greater able to advance your career to begin with. You have some ability to get recognized. You can probably make more of the same art in future. It means you're able to advance that platform. Probably secondly, probably gives you a greater ability to break into other things. That's to say, if you get, say, a best actress for a woman of color award, I think that is a level of recognition that probably allows you to break into the industry further in future. Means you get hired in even more like potential Oscar-winning mainstream films. I think that is a flow-on effect there. But thirdly, I think we simply get more of these films and pieces of art made, right? Because when you have the guarantee, a guarantee of a competitive role which you are actually going to be actively competitive in, that gives you gives more a greater incentive towards funding these films to begin with, to having them be made, to giving them an actual shot. It means you actually approve more of these films. You want them to be made. It means you give more funding to these films in the first instance, so they have the greatest shot of being successful within their unique category. That thirdly, you market them in the best ways. You put more funding in theirs. You try and guarantee their success. You do this uniquely under the outside, because there is a category they are now substantially more likely to be effective in. But note, we uniquely tell you why these categories still matter. That means there just is an incentive to not only to produce these films in the first instance, but to make sure they are done well, to make sure they have a fighting chance. I think we get more of these films. I think they are done significantly better. So secondly, then, on this stuff about narrative, and it's seen as you winning a fake award, I already proved to you that you are likely to, that these awards are seen well. But secondly, I want to note this just does not preclude you from receiving other awards. I would note, actually, probabilistically, it means you are more likely to be able to win more awards, mainstream awards as well. Because if you have more backing for these films, for these individuals, if they have more opportunities, substantially more of them are made. Because I would note, I don't think affirmative ever engages with a massive structural reason that precludes people from success, which is not just the individual bias at the point of judging. It is just structurally there are fewer opportunities for success, fewer of these films made in these categories, fewer of those actors diverse actors overall, which means that even if the pool of actors is equally skilled, it is just more probable that because there are more people from non-diverse backgrounds who have had greater opportunities to success, it means they are just more likely that probably one of them might just be better. Or if you're choosing between people who are largely equally skilled, you might just err on someone who happens to be from the majority. Whereas we uniquely allow you to balance for that effect. All these reasons, I think this change just is good, it's interpreted well, but we get you certainty, whereas they rely on the speculative benefit of there maybe being some films that eventually win these awards. We tell you we get them certainly, but we tell you that you get the best awards. Second question I want to ask, is transparency actually useful? How does this actually help? They tell you now you have an ability to evaluate what these metrics are being used, and you can really expose them super well. I'm going to engage firstly with the point at which these awards are being judged and why it is unlikely to be useful. Firstly, I would note that there are a series of such structural factors which mean just that it is often going to be less diverse films which win, that just has nothing to do with bias itself, that there's just a proportionally higher chance they're going to be good because there's just more of them produced in the first instance. But secondly, they are most likely to be better funded and have the resources in order to be successful, because there's the greatest perception that they will have commercial success. You have investors that are willing to pull funding into them, but also because they probably have the greatest number of connections and ability to access those, like, you know, get good training for your actors, to recruit the best types of actors. This means that they probably structurally, like, are often still going to win out even if the criteria is fair. But secondly, we tell you there are a series of reasons, which means criteria just probably isn't actually that good. That firstly, I'd note that if you do make the criteria particularly objective, this incurs two harms. Firstly, I note these a very objective metrics are probably easiest to succeed upon when you do have the wealth to pull them off well. That's to say, if your criteria for a makeup award is really objective in terms of how high quality it needs to be, I think that's really easy to do when you are a film that already has a ton of commercial backing. Whereas if it is more subjective, you probably have a greater chance for inclusivity. But I'd say that just does mean that people the most privileged still win these awards. But secondly, I think this, if they are particularly objective, that concretizes norms in a way that is likely to be harmful, because I think these are still being formed from Western privileged perspectives, but now you just concretize the types of narratives that they want to see and they reward them through those metrics. I think that is even more sticky than if you have the chance for other ways there. But secondly, if these narratives are subjective, I think if these metrics are relatively subjective, I would note you probably just can justify those awards. I think we explained to you pretty clearly, sometimes the difference between films is not that large. You cannot say it is always biased when they are both good quality films, right? I think it is easy to justify those things. Secondly, then, I think that explains to you that regardless of how these metrics are formulated, you are always still going to have privileged films that are able to win. It is unclear why they get reformed there, but it does make a film worse. It means that you reward most privileged films already. You make that criteria most sticky. That kind of sucks. But secondly, on the idea of the panels themselves and whether you can hold them directly accountable, I note that firstly, you're probably already able to justify the people who are on them at even if they are privileged and non-diverse individuals, but for the reasons we set out to you structurally, they probably just are the most qualified. They've had the greatest access to connections over time. You can justify them being on the panels. They've probably had a million directing opportunities, whatever. So structurally, you can justify undiverse panels on the basis of a meritocracy. But secondly, even if you do appoint more diverse panels, these are just likely to be virtue signaling, and that you probably have an incentive to appoint the people who will challenge the decisions of the panel the least, and therefore you still will probably get bad people in there. But secondly, if they are diverse but still privileged enough to be in that panel, that should probably indicate to you they've had enough connections that they maybe care less about their first sense. I think that explanation, you do not get pressure so proud to negate.
Do it now. Very good.
Panel, apparently these new transparent panels can only be entirely cis white men because they're structurally experienced, or they can only be virtue signaling. That is an incredibly uncharitable characterization. We're going to explain why it's likely wrong, and we're going to explain why the only way we can fix that into the future is under side affirmative. If we want to avoid this, and if we want to have meaningfully diverse panels, we need to make a break with the past, we need to make a meaningful change now, we need to do that with the policy proposed by affirmative. There's a couple of things here in meta before I get on to weighing the two key clashes in this debate. Firstly, all of the benefits they get only accrue if you genuinely believe that their policy is mutually exclusive to affirmative, which I think is underproven. Secondly, if you believe that it is a legitimate counterprop, I would question at the point where you're going to have the amount of new awards that they have compared to setting up, making transparent things that exist in status quo, whether they have sufficient fear. But I don't need to fear bash, I don't need to do all the meta debating. I can prove that their alternative is functionally worse than ours in this debate as well. All right. So, on this clash of the cost of meaningful reform and why side affirmative in this debate absolutely ends up with better minority representation, higher quality minority representation, and in fact is the only side with lasting minority representation, the only side which fixes all the structural reasons which they want to push back on us on next. All right, there's a couple of pushes here. First, I just want to talk about this concrete benefit of getting an Oscar. Firstly, it's fairly obvious that the more Oscars you have, the less meaningful each of them is. It's going to be obvious that the smaller the category from which you win an Oscar, the less meaningful it is. The less historical prestige that Oscar has, the less meaningful it is. There are three reasons why these Oscars are not going to be as important as they want you to believe. Note how that weighs against our material, where we tell you that this is going to crush autonomous film awards. They tell you that some people will operate both symmetrically. What we never get is the scale of these people who are likely to do both. And note here, panel, also, it is important that these like the functional mech which was different between those is autonomy, because it is queer people judging queer films, it is people of colour judging films by people of colour about people of colour. They never give us any reason why the Oscars, who are historically racist, sexist, homophobic, they never give us any reason why without our transparency mechanism, all of a sudden these panels are going to be good at judging films made by minority groups. It is a missing link, which it is too late to fix at 3N, because it is entirely terminal to the success of their counterprop. All right, then on like why these are more important, they tell us that like their alternative is more important. There is no way you can stand up and genuinely believe that like your person of colour Oscar is going to be received by the public to the same extent that the historical like best actor Oscar is. In fact, it's like we give you the 3 reasons why they're going to be perceived as less important, but notably, the narratives which operate around this are also likely very harmful. We tell you like this like the narrative which is sadly going to emerge around this because of these things, like all the structural reasons which they don't fix on side neg, is that we're getting like fake Oscars, is that we are virtue signalling. If they think virtue signalling is a problem under our side, you cannot imagine how these are likely to be perceived by the general public. It is unclear how they are going to achieve any of the level of prestige that we need like historically disadvantaged groups to get. The only way we get historically disadvantaged groups to like achieve these levels of prestige is to win traditionally prestigious awards, to break down those structures which have kept them out of winning those traditionally prestigious awards. We explained down the bench why the transparency net is one of the best things to do that. Then on like incentives to make films, they tell us that like now because you can win a different Oscar, people are going to want to make films. Panel note, film studios in white Hollywood are just going to want to pay to you know, make the films that win Best Picture, win Best Actor, win Best Supporting Actor. Unclear why all of a sudden this money is all going to shift. That's like a minor benefit to them at most. All right, then they tell us that like it reduces scrutiny. Panel, obviously this makes scrutiny more effective. At the moment, when like the Oscars are racist, when the Emmys are racist, when the Grammys are blah blah, when any of these prestigious organisations are racist, sexist, homophobic, discriminate, you are yelling at a cloud. It is old man, or like in this case, probably young people protesters, yell at random, ethereal, unaccountable body because they don't like the decision they made. We change that because you know precisely where this bias might be coming in. You can see the records of judges. You know now if your panel is entirely like cishet white men, or if it's people who they tell us have like been raised in these systemic structures which make them likely to favour white men, or you know if these are people who have like meaningfully engaged in, maybe it's the queer film industry, maybe it's people who've had a lot of experience like as a person of colour in the film industry, like all of these sort of things. Improve the level of scrutiny. We're obviously doing something to change the status quo in this debate. Saying the status quo mechanism doesn't work is like not actually a legitimate response where we explain where we get the delta in this debate. All right, they tell us there's no incentive to change. As like same response, we make the status quo incentives to change more effective. We make protests more effective. We make boycotts more effective because you are not just yelling at like this ethereal like panel who you have no idea who's on it. You have no idea how it's constructed. You are now saying you now have meaningful things to point at. All right. Then they tell us you get superficial diversity, but apparently they're also going to get all these new films from historically disadvantaged people made from major studios. Note that tension, note how that's unclear, how it's asymmetrical, we get more diversity. Therefore, panel, there's a couple of extraneous responses, noting there that like we've largely mitigated or like refuted all the harms that they think are mutually exclusive with our policy. I have 3 extraneous responses to their like counterpoints. All right, firstly, explained a little bit already, this limits autonomous awards, and we get 2 responses to this. Firstly, that these are unimportant because they're external. We tell you that like autonomy is incredibly valuable, and these awards have existing legitimacy and will not likely suffer the same extent of backlash. We can make these awards are likely to grow in popularity as like, you know, more progressive generations who are more structurally aware of these things grow up. As these awards gain popularity, they're not going to be crushed by the comparative Oscars, and like these are going to gain legitimate popularity as awards. They're going to get you a lot of the access to a lot of those benefits. Then they tell you like access a new audience. We think that a lot of these things are like written down on paper. Your Oscar winners, not all that. We don't think it delta in this debate to people who watch the Oscars. So we think that like this change here is relatively minor. Secondly, we push back. This is unlikely to be done well, and weigh this versus their analysis on like concretized benefits. They think they're going to get concretized benefits. We tell you there is no structural reason in this debate that they provide you why their policy is likely to be implemented well. Without the transparency mechanism to like improve the quality of panels, to improve decision making, it is entirely unclear why these historically racist institutions, where they do not fix the structural barrier to historically disadvantaged group success, Where they do not do that, it is unclear why this is ever going to be done well, why this policy is going, where the policy is going to be implemented well. It does not stand as a meaningful policy on its own. Thirdly, I note here as like a final response, which is actually quite important. It has zero intersectionality. Note, like, what is the extent to which they're going to take this policy? Are we going to have our queer woman of colour director award? No, at the point at which they're going to be expanding the Oscars to this point, they just clearly don't have feet to pass that policy. That the amount of capital it would take comparative to us is just enormous. Finally, then on hence why we necessarily take better outcomes to minority groups. Then, why art gets worse. This is very quick. They tell us that having explicit codes is a problem. We tell you that having explicit codes means that the public can actually see the degree to which the Oscars are likely to reflect their interest. We tell you that the Oscars then have an incentive to maintain their prestige, to make the outcome of the Oscars and the criteria of the Oscars relatively similar to what the public want, because that's how the public is going to be judging good film. We tell you that's a good thing because they're pushing that art just caters to the Oscars. Okay, it does this in status quo. People can still think it's shit. What this does is it changes Oscars to reflect public criteria. That's an incredibly good thing because we want art to reflect public criteria. We know that the public cares about disadvantaged people of colour. That's why there's been protests at the Oscars. A, we can fix that. B, we can get better art. For all those reasons, vote ACT.